Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we're going to be talking about my 5 favorite SNES rental memories. I didn't rent a lot of SNES games when I was a kid. I kind of missed out on this console in the early 90s, and my family decided to buy a PC instead. So a lot of these games were rented by my friend Drew, and I would go over to his house and play them. I don't ever remember renting games from either Blockbuster or from Hollywood Video. Most of the games that I remember renting for the SNES came from Family Video. I think we also rented from another place. It was just called the General Store. It was exactly that. You could buy candy, fireworks, and rent movies and video games from it. So let's get into the list, and I'll stop rambling about this. So the first one up is ActRaiser. This was developed by Quintet and was published by Enix. This is an awesome game. It's kind of like a multi-genre game where you do have some side-scrolling action levels which have really great controls, and then you get this kind of top-down SimCity God game in between those, which is so much more fun than the action-adventure stuff, or at least the platforming levels, at least in my opinion. But that's just kind of the style of game that I enjoy more. So one weekend, my friend Drew and I were looking for something to rent, and he picks up ActRaiser. I have no idea where he found out about this game, but it kind of sounded like he had rented it before. And so we rented this one. And yeah, it was really awesome. We didn't really know exactly what we were doing, but ActRaiser is pretty intuitive. There's not really a whole lot of complicated things going on in this game, so it was fairly easy to pick up. I don't think I beat the game with him that night, even though ActRaiser is kind of a shorter game. I'm pretty sure that I beat it once I downloaded it onto an emulator, much later on. And yeah, it was a ton of fun to play. I was really excited for the remaster, or the remake, sorry. And yeah, this is one of my favorite games on the SNES. Secret of Evermore is, again, another game that my friend Drew and I rented. But he rented it after I had started playing Secret of Mana, also on an emulator. And he said, well, if you like that one, you'll probably really like this one. And I did back then. I thought it was a lot of fun. And it has a lot of things that I think are improvements on Secret of Mana. When I went back and played it, I didn't enjoy it as much. I still thought it was a lot of fun, but there was something missing from it that I just don't remember missing back in the late 90s when I played this. I think the alchemy system in Secret of Evermore is a huge improvement over Secret of Mana's magic system and everything, and I just like the fact that you have to swap your party members in order to solve some puzzles or advance in some parts of the game. I think that one is better than Secret of Mana's just a whole crap ton of weapons that they throw at you, and some of them are more useful in some cases than others. It's interesting. I mean, you still have that in Secret of Evermore, but it's done better in that game than I think it is in Secret of Mana. I also like the plot of Secret of Evermore a little bit more. Just the fact that you're a kid who's obsessed with movies back in the day, and he ends up getting caught up in an experiment and transported to some crazy world and has to find his way out. I like that a little bit more. Not everything that you rented back then was really memorable for being good. Sometimes you rented a game and it was kind of a disappointment for you. That's sort of how I felt with Young Merlin. I remember renting it with Drew, and again, it sounded like he had played it before, or maybe he had rented it, or maybe he read about it in Nintendo Power, because he's the one who had a subscription to it and I didn't. I was just kind of going along for the ride at that time. This one is weird because there was no movie or TV show or toy line tie-in to it, at least not that I was aware of, so it was just kind of a standalone game that got thrown out onto the Super Nintendo for some weird reason. It's an interesting game, and it plays a little bit like a Legend of Zelda clone, but I don't think it's anywhere near as good as Legend of Zelda. And playing this, again, for doing this short list, I was reminded of how much I would rather have been playing Legend of Zelda. There's nothing really wrong with Young Merlin. It is a fun game. It's got some interesting puzzles. It's got some fun stuff going on in it. But it's just one of those games that makes me want to play the game that it's modeled after instead of, what this one is. If you've ever rented a game back in the 80s and 90s, there's bound to be one of those games that you don't really remember why you rented it. You just know that I rented it one time, played it, and then kind of forgot about it for a while. You also might have been suckered in by one of the many bad movie licenses that were turned into video games back then. It was rare when you stumbled across one that was even halfway decent. That's kind of the case with True Lies on the Super Nintendo. I don't remember why Drew and I rented this. I don't even remember if Drew and I were the ones who did rent it, or if one of my other friends in the neighborhood had rented it, and I ended up playing it at their place. It's something that I'm going to attribute to the fact that Drew made me rent it, but I don't really know if it was. Anyway, when I went back and played it, because I know that I had rented it at one point, I think it's kind of a fun game. It sort of adds in a little bit of Metal Gear Solid, where you're trying to avoid enemies in this, but it's not as good as that, and it's not done as well. It feels a little, I don't know, it feels like it's trying to be Zombies Ate My Neighbors, but it just isn't that good because it's still tied to True Lies, which is more of like an action spy movie. And yeah, it's fun, but I don't really like it all that much as some of the other games. I think Illusion of Gaia is more like a Zelda game than what Young Merlin was. It's also a much better game than what Young Merlin was. This is one where I remember renting it with my friend Drew because he said it was similar to something like Secret of Mana or Secret of Evermore. And also he knew that I liked The Legend of Zelda, so he was like, well, you'll probably enjoy this one. But I also played this over at my cousin's house a few times, and it's really the only game that I can say with any confidence is a game that I played with one of my cousins, because none of them were really gamers, and I don't think some of them are even aware that, technology has progressed past the 1980s. This is an action RPG, and I think it's a really awesome one. You play as Will, and you can change into other characters along the way, which you're required to do in order to progress certain parts of the game. Like, there are certain puzzles that you need to become Frida in the night, and others you need to become, like the ninja guy whose name escapes me, but you need to do these different things in order to get past certain obstacles. It's a ton of fun, and I think it's actually got a really great story as well. You find out that the entire world that you're in is a variation of the real world, where a comet passed by Earth and it messed everything up, and now you're visiting all these different ruins to try to piece together what happened and set the world right. And it all culminates with you defeating Dark Gaia at the end, and then resetting the world to normal. You then learn that your main character is not going to have any memory of this, and yeah, it's pretty awesome, I think. I also like the European title a lot more. I think Illusion of Time makes a lot more sense than Illusion of Gaia, but whatever. I don't have too many memories of renting games on the Super Nintendo, as you can kind of tell with just the 5 that I've mentioned here. I'm pretty much out of rental games for the Super Nintendo at this point. There might have been an instance where my friend rented Chrono Trigger, or maybe he rented Earthbound once or twice. I think he rented Final Fantasy VI, but I could be completely confused on that one, because a lot of these games we also picked up on emulator as well, so some of those memories kind of get conflated over time. The Super Nintendo had plenty of excellent games, and rental stores were among the ways people would learn about them. Contrary to what some people on the internet say, not everyone had a subscription to Nintendo Power. Many of us just had a friend who had a Super Nintendo, or they learned about these games eventually through emulators, or something along those lines. So, while you didn't always know everything about every game, you would occasionally discover certain things along the way, and they would either make an impression on you, or they would just be forgettable. Anyway, I think that's going to wrap things up. I've probably rambled on about this for longer than I really need to. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let me know what some of the games that you rented or discovered on emulator are. I'll talk to you later. Bye.